I'm Sarah Jackson, host of Internal Comms Pro, the podcast, a listening experience choreographed to help you elevate your internal communications to the pro level.
So the major piece of news, Slack is being acquired by Salesforce, was then out in the ether. And certainly there are a million pieces and parts to this, but internal communications is closely woven through every single piece.
Doing an acquisition of this size ever is a huge endeavor in a communications perspective, and then doing it on top of all the other change and uncertainty that you're trying to navigate at the same time, it just compounds it. But I think also points to how important it is that there is an internal comms person at the table thinking through how to best message this and how to best represent the employees and what they need.
There's a bit of an awakening that has happened over the past year of recognizing the possibilities of internal communications and, very specifically putting deliberate strategic effort toward your company's culture and toward that employee experience.
There's lots of different emotions, and so how can you take care of all of those, knowing that it's not a one size fits all approach?
That's Jessica Bauer and Amanda Atkins from Slack. One of the biggest stories that rocked the internal comms world this year was Salesforce acquiring Slack for $27 billion. Yes, folks, that is billion with a B. When the world heard this news, it sent shockwaves through our industry. However, when I heard this news, I wondered, who are Slack's internal communicators? And how in the world are they going to go about communicating this change on top of a pandemic, all while being front and center stage of what we see as the future of internal communications? Well, to my delight and no surprise, I discovered two trailblazers from the Midwest who used their homegrown chutzpah, talent, and passion for this work to lead a change communication and digital strategy that will pave the way for all of our organizations needing a path forward to the future of internal communications. Let's dive in and meet our two trailblazers now.
My name is Jess Bauer. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Director of Internal Communications at Slack.
My name is Amanda Atkins. My pronouns are she, her, and I am Senior Director of Internal Communications at Slack.
Well, I have been dying to get both of you here on our show. For those who are not familiar with Slack, tell us a little bit more about the product and what is it like to work in internal comms at the holy grail of internal comms industry?
The beauty of Slack is that it becomes this central point for all of the things that you need to do your job, whether it is getting information from the company about breaking news or your benefits sign up or whatever. Or if you are trying to, get a very important question answered, or you are trying to just work on a project with people who are on very different teams, maybe in different time zones, et cetera. Or if you just are trying to build community among your coworkers and want to have a conversation about something that you love, like cycling or movies or whatever. Slack enables all of that, and you're able to do the vast majority of your work without leaving Slack because it is a platform that has so many integrations with the different kinds of software that people use in their job.
Yeah. Well, and especially during the COVID crisis. I mean, we had with our team, we had pup dates, and that's where we put our dogs and our pets, and recipe box, and we shared recipes, and we have running club, and I mean, you name it, we did it. And and then the integration with Canva. And I mean, I could go on and on. So yes, it is a great tool. So let's dive into this journey. So in case you're just tuning in, listeners, the biggest story hit the internal comms community. Salesforce acquired Slack for 27 billion. That's with a B, folks. And it just sent shockwaves through the entire industry. So the fact that you two are here to give us the inside scoop of what that was like, tell me about that, and particularly what change management insights can you offer our audience? I'm assuming there was this increased criticality of internal communications through each stage of the acquisition. I want to hear about those stages and talk about those changes and how your efforts enhanced the employee's experience through that whole journey.
There is a lot to say here. I'll start by talking a little bit about leading up to the announcement of the acquisition itself, because that was quite a fascinating exercise, both in internal communications and your own as a human sort of change management curve that you are managing at the same time. So you go from one day learning that the company that you have worked for 5 years is going to be acquired by another company, and being like, "Oh, wow, this is a big deal. I need to process this. I need to absorb this." To like instantly diving right into the work of figuring out, okay, how are we going to communicate this to our employees? How are we going to communicate it to the world? How do we need to make sure that those two things are in lockstep with one another? How do we make sure that the right people are brought in at the right time to be able to prepare and support the announcement itself and our customers once that news starts to get out, etc. So we went right into that work of choreographing the information flow and determining what are all of the millions of things that people are going to need to know, want to know, things that are going to freak them out, things that are going to make them excited, immediate questions that they're going to have about the business, immediate questions they're going to have about what this means for them personally. And so you kind of have like this, it's like this bombardment of like there's a thousand things you need to figure out in a very short period of time. And having never worked on an acquisition of this size before, it was a little bit of like, whew, okay, where do you even begin? And so uh, in terms of timing, this all happened very, very quickly. I found out about the acquisition 2 weeks before we announced, and I was able to bring Jess into the loop. And so, those 2 weeks, most of it together, some of it together, we were working around the clock on all of these pieces and parts, from exactly what do we need to happen? When do we need it to happen? What materials are required to make that happen? How does all of this coordinate, not just among ourselves at Slack, but also with the Salesforce side and with their plans and how they typically do things. And the review process is so much more complicated than we're used to, because you're not only getting things approved by stakeholders within your organization, but within another organization and both of their legal teams, and they don't always agree. And so it's a lot of cycling through to make sure that you are balancing what needs to be done with the legal requirements, and being able to help translate a lot of that into language that your employees are going to be able to understand and take action on. So being really thoughtful about what is the experience going to be like for employees? How can we make that as positive of an experience as possible? And then kind of like working backward to like, what are all of the things that we need to build in order to hold up that employee experience that we need to have happen in the end?
Yeah, and to do it in the time period that you had to do it in, and not only on a personal level to be processing that, it's almost as if you didn't have time to even process it on your own emotional level, because it sounds like you just were thrown into the thick of it to start choreographing for your, coworkers.
Yes, totally. And Jess and I will sometimes joke about being just expert compartmentalizers, because you almost have to recognize, okay, I need to have my processing and emotions about this thing and work through my own change management curve, but not right now. I need to be able to put that in a box and store it away, and really focus on what the company needs in order to get through this. And once that is out, and once that is ticked and tied, then I can go back and open that box and go through my own change curve. But there's definitely a practiced. It takes it takes a lot of practice and sort of self awareness to realize that I am actively choosing to do things that way. And I think that's a combined superpower that Jess and I have.
That's a great, great tip to compartmentalize it with your own self, because there were so many different types of I would say emotional type of issues, throughout 2020 that we as internal communicators, right, had to communicate. And, we've had episodes on this where you did have to kind of go through it, or we talked about, with different guests, what they did to get through it themselves or to compartmentalize. It's gosh, that is such a great tip. Jess, what's your take on all this?
I think that that is so true. And Amanda and I are both from the Midwest, so this will not be the last idiom that you hear from us. But we often say in internal comms that we're like the cobbler's children. We never have any shoes because we're so worried about whether everyone else has shoes and if they're tied and if there's holes in them and if they need to be shown. So it's definitely interesting. And personally, I don't even know if I've opened the box back up yet to process because we're still it's the announcement was its own beast, and we're still in the thick of a period of uncertainty where we're still figuring things out. And I think that you're absolutely right. 2020 was such a roller coaster, and I think that was probably one of the hardest things for ourselves and for our employees is that we got to December and you started seeing things online like, can 2020 just end now? Like, we're so close. Like, 2021's got to be better. And then in December, I think December 2nd was when we announced this. It was like, actually, we're just going to sneak in one more really big event that is going to create some more uncertainty right before the buzzer. And so that, that's been interesting because there's a lot of positive things around the acquisition. I think that many people feel like this is the best move for our business and are very excited about it, but still have questions about what it means for them personally. And that's what we're still trying to navigate with this uncertainty is what can we share when, how can we make sure that everyone is taken care of, and knowing that people are coming from very different places. Some people might have been at the company for a month or a year, or like Amanda, 5 years, or they're on different teams, and there's lots of different emotions. And so, how can you take care of all of those, knowing that it's not a one size fits all approach?
Well, you hire 2 strong-willed Midwestern girls and you take care of it. That's the answer. Amanda, what else you got for us here on this point?
I wanted to touch on sort of the multiple phases of something like an acquisition specifically. We've focused on getting through that day when you can finally tell everybody what's going on, which is a huge relief, because you're building everything up to this moment of being able to pull back the curtain and say, "Hey, this is the news." But to Jess's point, there's still so much that you don't know at that point. So the major piece of news, Slack is being acquired by Salesforce, was then out in the ether. But that just leads to this next phase of what is officially called integration planning. And this is the period where the two companies are able to work together to figure out how the actual combination of organizations is going to occur. And certainly there are a million pieces and parts to this, but internal communications is closely woven through every single piece, whether it is how does this change things for employees like benefits and payroll, all the way to what needs to change on our websites, what needs to change for um, our go-to-market strategies, what needs to change for all of these different systems, et cetera. And that requires a remarkable amount of planning and really understanding the downstream effects of a lot of these decisions and a lot of the things that are being considered. And I think one of the powers of having a strong internal communications team is that you automatically have then a group that has that 50,000 foot view across the company because we have our hands in all of these different pieces and parts of the business and understand how those things fit together because we are constantly helping people put the puzzle together. I think one of the most critical things that we can do for employees is to be so transparent and so clear and honest with them about what we do and don't know, what we can and cannot share, and why. So, and demonstrating some vulnerability around that. I think there's a lot of power in being able to tell people, look, I know that it is hard not to have this information.
Good. That's good to know that tone, because here from a listener standpoint, we're like, oh, you're so big and corporate, and but to hear that shine through, I love that. Jess, what's your take on all this?
Yeah. So I think that This is a very big, complex change project, like Amanda alluded to. And then this is probably the motto of 2020 and frankly 2021, where it's like, it's just more is more. So, on top of that, then you have all of the questions that are surrounding the pandemic and the future of work, right? So, it's not only what's happening to some of these things that personally impact me at my job, but also when are we going back to the office, and do I need to come into the office, and can I move to Kentucky to be Sarah's neighbor so we can have lemonade on the back porch, or do I need to stay in the city? And Salesforce has said this, and this is what our previous stance was. And so it's just navigating all of these complexities on top of one another. And I think doing an acquisition of this size ever is a huge endeavor in a communications perspective, and then doing it on top of all the other change and uncertainty that you're trying to navigate at the same time, it just compounds it. But I think also points to how important it is that there is an internal comms person at the table thinking through how to best message this and how to best represent the employees and what they need. And I totally agree on the authenticity of this experience from our perspective around, we don't always know, and we care about this too, and yes, this is frustrating, and I see you, and here's what we know. And I think one of the things that Amanda and our team has tried to do over the course of this communication is that even if we don't have anything new to share, that we still give consistent updates, because I think it is very easy for someone to create their own narrative if they don't know what's happening. And even if you don't have anything to share, you're being transparent that it's top of mind and you care about it, and that you're going to give information as soon as you have it. Because I think we are privy to more of what's going on behind the curtain, and how complex and how much time it takes to come to an agreement on what is happening and what you can communicate, and bringing people along on that journey as much as you can, even if you don't have something concrete to share with them. Or if you can say, hey, this is why it's taking so long for us to figure out what's going to be the future of PTO because of X, Y, and Z. I think it really helps to build even more trust that you have their best interests at heart, and that you're being as transparent as you can within the confines of the situation.
Well, and I think it's fascinating you were talking about you're building the plane as you fly it. I mean, I would have thought that Salesforce, would it be like, all right, this is how it goes down. Here's the playbook. Here's your checklist. Like, did you have any guidance or coaching, or was it truly, all right, let's start with the end? And like you said, which I loved, how do we want people to feel at the end of this? And then did you just build a project plan? Like, I'm trying to get into the tactical weeds for our listeners on the actual sort of high level strategy and the elements of your plan. Like, give us the sort of sequential, maybe big buckets. Okay, like if this happens to you, step one, right? Can you speak to that?
Yes, absolutely. So I think, uh, so Salesforce definitely has a playbook. I mean, they've done so many acquisitions quite successfully. They have so many things that have worked very, very well for them, which is great because they bring this certain level of expertise and experience to the table, um, that we don't have in the same way, particularly when it comes to bringing organizations into that larger organization, let alone just doing sort of big M&A work across the board. It's been very helpful from the beginning to have clear communication and connection with the right people on their side, to work with, to collaborate with, to get insight into how they navigate different acquisitions. But I think one of the best descriptions that I heard from them about their playbook, for lack of a better term, is that it's written in pencil, not pen, and that they recognize that there will be differences for different organizations because every business and every culture and every employee base is unique and has its own nuances. And so I've appreciated, from the beginning, that there has been a great deal of listening and flexibility involved, and it really has been a collaboration to say, okay, this is generally how we do things in terms of, this is what you can expect at these different stages of the timeline. This is when we're going to do discovery on this topic. This is when we're going to start getting into organizational structure. This is when we're going to be able to start talking about benefits. This is, just really having that big picture view, but recognizing that when it comes down to the tactical details of how things happen, there there isn't going to be a prescriptive approach that we have to adopt.
Circle Broadcast is a proud member of the Internal Comms Pro Collective. During trying times, you can't afford to have remote employees in the dark grasping for information. Using Circle Broadcast's cross channel employee communications tool, you can be sure that employees are seeing the right message at the right time on the most convenient channel. To find out how Circle can help your organization better manage your change communications, visit circle.com/ICP. That's CERKL.com/ICP. Now, in this next part, Jess and Amanda dive into the elements of their digital channel strategy. I ask specifically how in the world they are keeping their employees not only engaged during an acquisition, but while communicating the ever changing information during a pandemic. Jess is also going to give us some great tips from her measurement strategy. And we end with these two trailblazers giving us their perspective on what lies ahead for the future of our industry. You don't want to miss this. Now let's jump back in. Let's get into it. You're the experts here. What does a digital strategy look like at a company like Slack? I mean, what tips would you give our listeners who they're trying to, innovate their own internal comm strategies? Give us a little insight. Teach us a little bit about how you think about, your strategy, and we can talk about, again, some of that messaging around the acquisition. But you're saying, oh, we also had messaging with COVID. I mean, I can't imagine all of this. How are you executing a digital strategy to keep those employees informed and engaged? Talk to me about that.
I think so much of our success in effective digital communication strategy comes from having a very clear information infrastructure and information flow within that infrastructure. So we have our channel strategy within Slack set up so that it's explicitly clear where employees go to get official company information about different topics. We make sure that employees are in the right channels depending on who they are. So, for example, if you are a sales employee who is based in San Francisco, then you are automatically from day one going to be in the official company communications channels for the sales organization, for the San Francisco office, for the all US employees, and for all global employees. And so these are, within Slack, we have these dedicated announce channels that are targeting very specific audiences with the information that they need to know based on those demographics. And so that structure is repeated across all locations, all departments, and in some cases, layers of seniority as well. We have private channels that target specific layers of leadership. And so having that as the really the foundation of that channel structure makes it easy for us to control the flow of information, ensure only the most critical things are being shared to the right channels at the right time, to make sure that information isn't being scattered to the wind across a million different platforms and us just hoping that it happens to get in front of the right people. But instead, we start from day one of onboarding with making sure that people have clarity on how information flow is structured and how they navigate that information flow. So you have your announcement channels where you're really pushing information out to the audiences. We have a whole structure around asking questions, whether it is, I have a question about my benefits, or it's something like I have a question for the executive leadership team about why a specific business decision was made or how they're thinking about something going on in the world or whatever. We have a standardized channel set up for questions of all varieties, but having that standardized structure that employees are taught how to navigate from the very beginning makes it very, very easy for them to access the information that they need when they need it.
Yeah, I love that. And I know in the beginning you talked about sort of being the front runners of revolutionizing the future of this discipline. And you mentioned measurement. I want to get into this. Maybe Jess, you can speak to this. What do you measure? How are you measuring engagement and success? And how are you innovating that piece so many people ask, like you were saying in the beginning, we influenced even the product of this matters to measure, but this not so much. Let's get into the measurement conversation a bit. Talk to me about that.
Yes, I love the measurement piece. Amanda can definitely testify to how I nerd out on that. So we we measure engagement in a lot of different ways, and I think one interesting thing about engagement is that our job is to have a pulse on how employees are feeling about certain things at any given moment in time. And I think when you have been in internal comms long enough and you understand a company and a culture long enough, and you have the trust where people feel like they can share how they actually feel and what questions they actually have, you develop this. But it's always really helpful to be able to paint a picture with data to show that this is my inkling, but also here is some information that backs up that this is actually the case. So we look at a lot of different things from an engagement perspective, both qualitative and quantitative. So from a qualitative perspective, we have a global ambassadors program, which we've identified individuals from different teams, tenures, and offices who do a 1-year rotation where we meet with them on a monthly basis. They are trusted individuals within the company where we're previewing information that's upcoming, or we're getting feedback, or we're also asking them to keep an ear to the ground and to share what kind of sentiment people have around anything that's going on. And so there's a really great two-way dialogue, and it's very representative of our global employee base. So we often hear input from this group, and then we will package that up and make sure that our executives see anonymously hear how people are feeling about certain topics, and then we think about how can we respond to that in a proactive way. So we have our ear to the ground in that regard, and we also have friendly. So we have really strong relationships with our people partners, with the executive assistants and chiefs of staff for our executives, and just people within the organization that we can go and tap and ask how they're feeling, both personally about something, but also what are they hearing on their team? How is their team feeling? So we're getting a lot of information and trying to make sure that we are passing that information along and then actually acting on it. So making changes based on the feedback that people have. And then the second thing is more of the quantitative piece, which Amanda mentioned earlier, a tool that we helped to influence, which is called message activity. That's one element. So looking at the engagement on messages in some of our major channels, like our announcements channels. Are people reading the messages that we send out? Are they reacting to them? Can we generate any sort of insight into the ratio of reactions or the types of emojis that people are using, even to understand how they're feeling about a certain piece of news? We also track engagement of how many people are attending our events. We've instituted a consistent survey that we send out after our company-wide all hands, which we do every single month, where we're asking the exact same question and getting feedback and comparing on the merits month to month. Did we have more or fewer people attend this one? Why is that? What is the feedback telling us about what people liked and what they want to hear more of? And then the third thing that we do that I don't think we've mentioned yet is that we actually have in addition to all of our specific help channels, and by the way, our team also has our own help channel, which is very helpful as well. We have a channel that's called Ask Me Anything. And it is an always on channel that our team monitors that our employees can go into, and they can ask a question about anything at any time, and we monitor it. We have an SLA of 1 week for responding. So if we see a question come in there, someone on our team has eyes on it immediately. We're working on the back end to identify the best executive or leader or subject matter expert to respond to it. And then we work with them to get a response out. And we also think about, if this is a hot topic, who else needs to be involved in drafting this or reviewing this. And we try to, be really transparent about, how we're sharing and previewing things, especially before we, publish it back, whether it's an announcement or in a response to this channel. And this channel is super interesting because we can get a sense for what employees care about. So if we see that a bunch of people are asking questions about a specific topic, then how can we be more proactive about our comm strategy to get ahead of some of these questions so that we are giving more consistent updates, because clearly this is something that is top of mind. And then one more thing I will say on that piece is that it's been a roller coaster of a year, and the roller coaster continues. And there is definitely an expectation, I think, that our employees have that our executives are going to address things that are happening in the world and in our lives that are impacting us as people. And sometimes we keep our ear to the ground in a lot of different Slack channels, even social ones. And if we see that there's a lot of conversation about something that is happening outside of the walls of our company, whether it's in the world or in other tech companies, often this will then bubble up as a question that employees have about what it means for them or what it means for Slack. And so we're always kind of keeping an eye on that. And because of some of these signals, we're better able to predict what questions people have or what they care about. And then hopefully, as we anticipate them, we can move to be more proactive about our announcement strategy, um, and how we're driving some of these key narratives in events and other places, so that we can get out ahead of them before people will even ask the question, because we already know that they care about it.
I love it. And then you're positioned as, the holy grail of what every internal communicator wants is this strategic coach and advisor because you've got the information. And listening to you both, it just makes me so proud of our Midwestern roots. You think of all the innovation on the East and West Coast. We're like, nope, you send an Ohio and Indiana gal out there and they're going to get it done. I'm just so proud. And so let's keep going. Since you're pioneers in this space, let's talk about the future, right? We've now have internal comms is center stage. And where do you see it going? I mean, where do you see the future of internal comms headed? Talk about what are you anticipating, new trends, tech? What are you doing, in your planning of 2021 and beyond? If you are running ahead of us, and we're all back here, 10 steps behind you, what are you seeing out there for us that we can anticipate?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I can start, and I have a lot of thoughts on this. I think about this often. I think one really interesting change that we've probably seen in the time that we have been in internal comms is that it's really growing into its own a function in its own right. I think 5 or 10 years ago, internal comms was in its very early days in terms of companies that were investing in these positions, and I think tech has always, had a role for internal comms or people who have kind of filled that. But I think in many, many industries and in many locations, especially because of distributed work and the pandemic and everything that's happening in the world, many leaders and many businesses are seeing the benefit of having someone that thinks strategically about the employee engagement and experience as a plus. And many companies are hiring for internal communications. So I only see this function growing bigger, becoming more important, and having even more of a seat at the table if they didn't already, with some of the strategic direction for how we're communicating everything that's happening within a company. I know that I said I'm a metrics guru. I think that having a better analytics and a better pulse on how people are feeling and what they are consuming is going to get even bigger, and I think there will be even more tools that will help people measure and communicate that. And then I think the pandemic has made us all very burnt out in many ways, but I think one of those big ways is with the tech that we use. So we talk about Zoom fatigue or meeting fatigue. I think that there will be even more platforms and ways to share micro async and digestible content, so that people can access it whenever they want, whenever it works for them, whether they are a caretaker and they have to be offline because they're helping to homeschool their children, or they want to go out on a walk during the middle of the day and catch up on things that they didn't have the opportunity to. I think making information more accessible and asynchronous is going to be a really big thing in the future as well.
Mhm. Amanda, what role do you see internal comms playing, particularly in the future of work, particularly as, we become more, geographically distributed, is more flexibility, around remote work? Talk about that.
There's a bit of an awakening that has happened over the past year of recognizing the possibilities of internal communications and, very specifically putting deliberate strategic effort toward your company's culture and toward that employee experience. It's the kind of thing where internal communication and company culture happens, grows, occurs, evolves, no matter whether there is somebody actually deliberately doing that or not. And so the question becomes, do you want to just let that happen, or do you want to be part of framing the narrative? It's hard to ignore the reality that creating a great employee experience, a big part of which is having a strong company culture that is nurtured, having extremely comprehensive and thoughtful information flow, all of those things contribute to making your employees feel more supported, more productive, more loyal. And it's just impossible to ignore that now. The other thing I would say is the pandemic really pushed organizations to think differently about social interaction between employees. And it's something that we have talked with customers about so many times over the years is this fear that people are just going to use Slack to share cat gifs and to, chat with one another when they should be doing work. And oh no, how do we prevent that from happening? And I've always had this perspective of you don't prevent it from happening, like you encourage it, and you be thrilled that your employees are building such positive connections with one another, because those things are going to pay off when they need to get real work done. That's how trust and camaraderie and relationships are built. And that whole ship has like completely turned around to where people are like, oh God, how do I foster these communities and the social interaction in Slack? Because without the offices, nobody knows how to do it. And so being able to see that sentiment shift of recognizing the power of connection and community building within your company, and that it isn't that it's actually like harnessing human nature for your benefit as an organization, as opposed to it being something that's distracting your people. I think that's another thing that is just going to continue to become more normalized within organizations. So, which actually leads me to the other thing that I think is genuinely the future of internal communications, which is just a much, much higher level of transparency. And that's not just a tech thing. I think that is evolving generational expectation. Modern workers expect to have a much greater degree of insight and understanding into the inner workings of their business. What are the decisions being made? How are they being made? Who's making them? What's being considered? Where can I share my ideas? All of those things are just they need to be built into the way that you are managing information flow at your company, or else you are going to be isolating a lot of your workforce who has very specific expectations of what that experience is going to be like. So the days of very formal company memos being sent out by a CEO, but everybody knows that there's no way that they wrote that message and it doesn't even really come from their email address, like isn't going to fly so much. There has to be that more vulnerable, human, employee centric, empathetic leadership approach. And to be able to do that effectively without without going like too far in the other direction to where you're slowing everything down because you're trying to get some sort of like agreement by committee or something. Like, to find that right balance really requires a certain level of expertise that I can see internal communications teams just continuing to extend their influence into that arena as time goes on.
I love it. Just tell us like it is. This is what's going to happen. I love that. Well, I can't thank you. This has been such a delight. I feel like you're my neighbors. When you come back here and visit and you want to process your own personal emotions finally, I will be here for you. I'm telling you, your vulnerability and openness to share what is just, like I said, sent shockwaves through the industry. We just can't thank you enough, and for giving us your tips, for being trailblazers. And I look forward to staying connected with both of you and seeing what comes up in 2021.
For sure. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it, folks. Tips on how to trailblaze your change communication strategy, and insight on the path forward to the future of internal comms. Now, if you want to dive deeper with Jess and Amanda, we'll put links on how to connect with them in our show notes. Stay with us next week as our journey to uplevel your internal communications to the pro level continues.
Internal Comms Pro, the podcast, is produced by the Internal Comms Pro Collective and proudly supported by the Circle Broadcast Suite, an entire suite built for internal communicators. Learn more at circle.com. And don't forget to visit www.internalcommspro.com/show notes for our free resource guides. Thank you for listening.